Hello and welcome to The Resourceful Woman. Today I want to talk with you a little bit about composting, why it is so important to compost, how everyone can compost no matter how you live or where you live. I'm going to walk through how this is possible for everyone to do and how important it is. And then I'm also going to talk about some of the things I came across as I was researching and trying to learn a little bit more about composting, to try to get some sense around some of the things that people seem to disagree on when it comes to composting, like in terms of what you can compost and what works and what doesn't. So let's jump in. The first thing I really want to talk about is why it is so important to compost and why this is such a big deal, why I'm even making a video about this, is because a huge amount of food waste just gets thrown away and thrown into landfills. And when food waste and also yard waste get thrown into landfills, it doesn't decompose properly in the same way that it would in your garden in a compost pile. It actually, the way that things break down in landfill means it produces a lot more methane and noxious gases, not things which are beneficial to the environment. And then all of the nutrients and things that are broken down in your food waste when they're left in the landfill don't actually go on to replenish soils and help things to grow better in future. So this is actually a really huge thing. I didn't even realize until I started researching for this video how big it is. It's that like a third of all of the food produced globally winds up in landfill. It's like 1.3 billion tons of food and food waste per year goes to landfill. If food waste was its own country, it would be the third biggest producer of methane gases after the US and China. So that's like, wow, okay. In terms of if you're one of my American friends and you're watching, something like 15 to 20% of the food that Americans buy and take home from the grocery store just gets thrown away. If you think about like what your weekly or monthly food budget is, just take 20% of that and just chuck it in the trash. Like, oh my gosh, it's terrible. In the UK, it's something like 250,000 tons per year, and the vast majority of food waste is household food waste. It's not businesses throwing away perfectly good carrots. It's not restaurants chucking out old lettuce. It's actually most of the food waste in the UK is via households. And in this country, it's worth something like 800 pounds per year per family. So I don't know what your monthly or yearly budgets are, but yeah, if you just took 800 quid and chucked it in the trash every year, I bet you'd kind of feel that. And so that's in terms of why this is actually a much bigger thing than I even realized, and that I think most people don't realize, is just food waste is a massive, massive thing that needs to come down. So what can we do? Okay, first of all, buy less food. If you wind up with excess that you're not necessarily going to eat, donate it to food pantries and things like that. Like, let other people have it. I know that when I lived in San Francisco, anytime you kind of like had leftovers at the end of a meal at a restaurant, you'd carry them out, but you'd never carry them home. You'd always like hand them off to somebody on the street. It was just kind of like how we lived there. Maybe think about kind of changing your food buying habits if you're finding that you're throwing out a lot of food. Maybe go shopping a little bit more often and buy less each time. I know that when I was little, we used to go for like, these massive, like every 2 weeks, we'd go and get groceries, and we'd get, a whole carload of groceries. And now what I do is I actually go grocery shopping almost every day. and I shop for exactly what I need, and I don't buy more than what I need, and so I don't wind up having a lot that needs to get thrown, other than like, you know, peels and cores and seeds and stems and things that, like, you know, just wouldn't be eaten in the first place. Also, something that I will address in a future video is there are things that you can do with old produce when it's, you know, it starts to go off and it's like, oh, you know, I don't really feel like eating this. I will do some stuff to kind of show you cool things you can do, particularly with fruits, making like dried fruits and fruit leather and things like that out of fruit that seems like it's about to go off. It actually is still edible, and there are still things that you can make out of it. Another thing that I've come across is just like there's kind of this obsession with like use by, sell by, best before, you know, all this stuff on foods. And as I was researching this, I realized that it's actually there's no kind of like set rule. There's no like government legislation or anything saying that anything besides like baby food has to be labeled with best before or use by or so on. That's something that food companies kind of impose on themselves, and sometimes it is a little bit arbitrary. I'm one of those people, like I trust my senses. I go by the smell and the look more than what the date is stamped on it. If something looks like it's still all right and it can still be used, I still use it. I know some people are like really, you know, about that. Well, I'll tell you something an old friend of mine has always said, that always makes me laugh, is it says best before, not shit after. So, you know, maybe think about, instead of just throwing something away because some arbitrary date is stamped on it, have a look, give it a think, you know, decide if it's something that you can still go with. Obviously, if you've had a lot of experiences with food poisoning and things, you're probably going to be a little bit funny about that. Me personally, I eat really healthy. I don't have a lot of stuff that, like, you know, goes past its sell by date to begin with, and I haven't had a lot of experiences with food poisoning, so I say kind of I'm not that nervous about it. There are some things to consider when you're deciding that you want to try composting. First of all, my number one recommendation is don't be nervous, just do it. Because as I was researching this video, I found, you know, I went through all these other videos on YouTube about composting, and a lot of people say, oh, you know, I took a long time starting because I really wanted to like research this and like get it right and like do it effectively. And I'll be honest, when I started composting a year and a half ago, I did it wrong in a lot of ways, and yet I still did it, and I actually got some decent compost out of it. And I also, most importantly, was not putting all this other crap into my bin and into landfill and everything. So first things first, just start doing it. Just start setting aside your compostable materials and get started thinking about doing a compost without overthinking it too much, without thinking about it so much that you stop yourself. The first thing you're going to want to consider is where is your compost eventually going to wind up. One option that is available really in a growing number of places is that you can collect all of your organic material at home and then go drop it off somewhere. So any kind of like major city, you know, New York or London or whatever, they have composting programs where you can kind of take all your stuff and go and send it somewhere, if they don't already have like a city program that just makes you compost. Like when I lived in San Francisco, you had to compost by law. You had to put all your compost stuff aside, and it would get collected separately from all of the other rubbish each week. So definitely check out in your city. And even if you're in a smaller city, I researched this a little bit. I just kind of like off the top of my head, I thought of a few kind of smaller cities, and I thought, okay, you know, let's see if they have a composting program. Let's see if they have something. Some do and some don't. But a surprising number do. So, like, you know, I looked up like Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Yeah, they have like drop-off composting. Like, okay, cool. So you may be surprised. Definitely, if you're watching this video, you know, and you're like, oh, I can't commit to like having my own compost pile at home, please do have a look and see if you you know, can just go and take it somewhere. That's not really the best option, I think, for most people. Me, for instance, like I don't have a car. I can't like, you know, drive somewhere. Something would have to be really close by. But I have a garden out back, so I've just started doing it in my own garden. A lot of people obviously do not have a garden. If you live in an apartment, if you live in like a big building, you know, you may feel like this is like not even an option. Why am I even watching this? Yeah, you still can compost, even doing it indoor, even doing it like on your little balcony, in your, you know, if you have a parking carport or a garage or, you know, someplace where you can park your car, you can set up a little compost area there. I would definitely encourage anyone who like lives in kind of a suburban apartment complex that you can get together with your neighbors and ask whoever kind of manages the units if you can just set up a compost pile somewhere. Like take some like dirty patch at the edge of the parking lot or something like that, and hey, can we just put our compost there? Can we start doing it? You may be surprised actually how easy this is to set up and get started. So in this video, I am going to show you how to do indoor composting. If you live in like a little apartment, you have absolutely no access to any kind of outdoor space. This is still an option that's available to you. And then I'm also going to show you, you know, how I've done my outdoor compost, the things I've done right and the things I've done wrong. So once you've kind of decided, okay, am I going to take it somewhere? Am I going to do it at home? How am I going to do it? The next thing you need to choose like is, okay, well, obviously, where am I going to do it? What type of, you know, composting setup are you going to have? Are you going to have like, you know, a big wooden sort of slat frame? Are you going to have like a kind of standing plastic thing with a lid? Are you going to have, what I've gone with, because I live in a rented house, and, you know, I wasn't sure, like, you know, what if my landlord comes along and they're like, remove this thing and everything. First of all, I didn't want to sink like a ton of money into it. And second of all, I didn't want to have something too big or too unwieldy that if I was asked to move it, that I wouldn't be able to like get it away. So what I did was I just bought these kind of these vinyl something bags that they have a zip in the top and then a little Velcro flap in the bottom. They're really cheap. They're like less than 10 pounds each, and because they're a little bit smaller, they have a smaller footprint. So I didn't have to set aside a huge amount of space in my garden to kind of set these up. They're not, you know, it's not too difficult. You also want to think about things like where, you know, can you place this? Can you place this, you know, in a garden? I mean, ideally, if you're doing a compost setup, ideally you have some sort of enclosed structure, vinyl or plastic or wood or something that has holes in the bottom or some sort of access to the bottom for both drainage, and that can sit on soil. And then all of the kind of like microorganisms and worms and bugs and things can kind of come up from the soil, and then all of the moisture can kind of drain through and back into the soil. So that would be the kind of like ideal setup. Some people actually, you know, if you have a lot of kind of like critters in the area, maybe you have like foxes or raccoons or something that are gonna like get into your rubbish. A lot of people like a more kind of standing situation, like a thing that's raised up off the ground. And for those, it's really good to have like a tumbler, because you don't have this access to soil, and so whatever sort of microorganisms and things are in there, they're going to want to kind of move about a bit. So what you do is, as you add things to your compost, every once in a while you go out and you spin it around, and it kind of mixes everything up, and it helps it kind of like get all broken down. So, you know, are you going to have a critter problem? Are you able to plop something directly onto the soil? Are you, do you have the ability to go out and kind of like, if you just do like a pile somewhere, to go out with like a fork or something and just kind of turn it every once in a while. If you just have kind of a standing compost that's not enclosed in anything, like those wooden structures, you probably will need to go around and give it a good turn every now and again. So another thing I discovered as I was kind of looking into all of this is some people will just dig a trench, and just basically bury all of their compostable stuff in the ground. And that is really as effective as doing like a layered compost pile. I sort of discovered this myself by accident, because what I had done initially in my garden was I'd chosen 2 places in which to kind of start composting. And basically, I definitely advocate this for you, having 2 spots where one is the spot that you're currently adding to. As you're kind of like cooking and making your meals and everything, you bring out your fresh organic stuff and just throw it into the compost pile. And then your other compost pile over here is kind of seasoning. It's had everything added, and it's just you're giving it a few months for everything to kind of break down and work and do its thing. So what I did, I'd chosen 2 spots in my garden that weren't kind of being used by anything. And I would, add a bunch of stuff to this spot and turn it every once in a while. And then I'd go and add a bunch of stuff to this spot and turn it every once in a while. One problem was that I didn't really keep up with it that well. Sometimes, a couple of weeks would go by and I wouldn't turn it or have done anything with it. Another problem was that this last kind of 4 or 5 months, we've had a ton of rain. And I think that my compost piles have actually had too much rain, and it's been really bad for them. And because they weren't enclosed, because they were just sort of like piles open to the outdoors, they had this kind of problem with them. But at one point I wound up with too much, and I had dug a hole and buried it. And as I was digging up my old compost piles to kind of create my new setup for this year, what I discovered was that everything that had been buried had broken down really, really well. So burying is an option. For me, it's not a great long-term option because I have to add stuff to my compost every week, which would mean like going out and digging a hole and burying stuff every week. And it's like, I don't have enough places in my garden to like just keep digging holes like I'm some kind of, naughty dog. So that's not really an option for me, but it is an option. If you're kind of like placing an enclosed compost bin somewhere, it's a good idea to find someplace kind of shady, maybe ideally not in full sun all day. So kind of like my friends in California, be a little, careful about kind of where you place your compost, because it can get too hot. If it gets, too hot or too cold, kind of microorganisms and things can die off, and it can be bad for kind of the speed and rapidity of your compost breakdown. So you have to really consider what space do you have and what works for you. And there's all these different types of, compost bins and things that, they each have kind of their positives and their negatives. For me, my priority obviously was finding something small, something that I could move if I had to, and not too expensive, because I'm still learning. And I don't want to invest like 200 pounds in like a big fancy compost setup until I really know what I'm doing. So just to get started, it doesn't have to be that expensive. It doesn't have to be that complicated. So the next thing to do is just start, collecting your food waste. And actually, not just food waste. I collect the lint out of the dryer. Some people say, be careful about dryer lint, because if you wear a lot of synthetic fabrics, then you can wind up with lots of synthetic stuff in in your lint trap. And yeah, that's true, but actually most of our clothes are cotton, and most of our dryer lint, like I'd say about 80% of our dryer lint, is pet hair. So perfectly compostable material, perfectly fine to go in. I also collect the hair out of my hairbrush. It's, it's organic, it breaks down, it's a thing. Now, there are loads of different things online about what can or should or shouldn't be composted, and I've been super surprised as I've been researching this to find that basically I've been doing this all wrong all along. Some people say don't compost onions and garlic because they repel earthworms. And I gotta say too, I cook with a lot of onions and garlic, tons of onion skins and ends and garlic peels and everything wind up in my compost, and I had a ton of earthworms. So however repelled they might be, they're not that repelled. Like they seem to be doing just fine with all of my onions and garlic. Another thing that I've heard some kind of back and forth about is eggshells. Most people who talk about composting say, yes, you absolutely should add your eggshells to your compost. A few people say, oh no, it's not good for the bugs, or it doesn't break down or everything. From what I can gather, the calcium carbonate in eggshells is actually really, really good for plants. It helps with plant cell structure. Up to this point, I've always been saving my eggshells, and I just crumble them up and actually distribute them over my plants as a sort of natural snail repellent, and also to kind of help roses grow and help things grow nicely. So I have started sort of adding some eggshells to the composting as well. So that is, one thing that, some people say don't do it. I would say, I don't see why not. Coffee grounds can definitely go in. If you use coffee in your filter, as long as you're using unbleached filters, you can just chuck the whole filter in. That paper of the filter will break down. If your coffee filters are treated with a lot of chemically stuff, you may not want to be adding that to your compost. So another thing that a lot of people seem to disagree about is citrus. Some people say absolutely leave all citrus skins, orange peels, things out of your compost for various reasons. Sometimes they say that it's because these are treated with pesticides, which, okay, yeah, that's a valid thing, or because of the acidity level in the citrus fruits is not good. A lot of people specifically say limes, don't add them to your compost. I'm going to say, I personally have added all kinds of citrus to my compost, and it doesn't seem to have had any negative effects. And as well, I've seen a lot of people who've posted online with kind of guidelines about what to add that have said that citrus is okay. So, I would leave that as a kind of a personal choice, whether you want to separate out your citrus peels or not. Similarly, banana peels. Banana peels are also going to be something that's probably treated with a lot of pesticides before it reaches you. So possibly consider give your banana a little rinse before you eat it. Kind of rinse off some of the pesticides from the skin. Obviously, it's not going to affect you eating it, but maybe giving it that little rinse will help get rid of some of the negative stuff. And keep it from going into, your precious bug's little life cycle. Another thing that people seem to really disagree on is tea bags, putting your tea bags in your compost pile. I am really non-committal about this. Most of the time, I think I just dump tea bags in the bin. And some of the time I'll just mindlessly just kind of chuck one into the compost pile instead. You do need to consider, what is the tea bag made of? Is that got a lot of synthetic material that's not going to break down properly? How about the string? How about the little paper tag? like, you know, the little paper tag on the tea bag is almost always some kind of waxy or plasticky finish, which is not supposed to go into your compost pile. So I'm like, I'm a little, but then I see a lot of other people online who do add tea bags and they don't seem to have a problem with it. Always, if you are, taking your compost and taking it to a drop-off point, absolutely 100% follow their rules about what they do and don't take. So whether it's citrus peels, tea bags, flowers, things like that. Flowers, I would say most people generally agree, do not add like florist flowers to your compost pile, because these are treated with a lot of pesticides and a lot of things, like even things that the food that you eat isn't treated with does go into florist flowers. So I would say just, you know, those you can stick in the bin. You don't really need to try to compost those, because I think there's probably a lot of chemicals and things that may poison all of your lovely earthworms and your organisms and things. Some people even say like twigs and sticks and stuff, like don't add twigs and sticks. But that's a pretty rare piece of advice. Most people say, yeah, adding twigs and sticks is like a very important, very essential part of compost. So what I do is just, you know, every once in a while I'll go around my garden and just prune back anything that kind of needs pruning, and create a pile of twigs and sticks and things. And when you're actually starting your compost pile, that should be the very first layer. You know, put that right down in the bottom, just a nice good layer of twigs and sticks and things, and that kind of helps with drainage of the overall pile. So whether you're doing this, you know, in a bucket, in something that you're going to keep, you know, on your balcony or in your home or something, or whether you're doing it in an outdoor compost pile, definitely do a layer of twigs and sticks in the beginning, and then keep some twigs and sticks and things to the side to add to your compost pile later as it's needed. One really important thing to remember to add to your compost is paper. So any kind of like paper bags, you know, bills and things that you get, you can shred them up. Paper is a really essential sort of component of your compost. And what I do is, you know, most kind of paper that comes in and out of the house goes out through recycling. But anything that kind of has our, you know, private details on it, bank account numbers, well, any kind of account numbers, I tear off our name and address labels on like basically everything that comes in. You know, anything that's just, you know, a little bit private, a little bit, you know, you don't want it going out to just anywhere, I will then shred that up and stick it into a bag for compost. Just take out anything that's got kind of like a shiny, waxy, plasticky sheen to it. That's not good for your compost. And then anything that's got like a lot of colored ink is really not great for it. So leave those out, just stick those in the regular recycling. Maybe they'll get recycled or maybe they'll get burned, who knows, but don't stick them in your compost. With your food stuff, I have gone through a few different iterations of this. You can always get like a little compost bucket to keep in your kitchen. And you keep it, you know, beneath your sink or something. It's got like a little lid to try to like keep flies and things out, or to keep smells from getting out. And you just, you know, you chuck stuff in there and then you empty it, you know, every few days or so. That is one option, and there are all kinds of cute little compost buckets out there and available in the market. Some of them have like some sort of like charcoal thing in the lid that is particularly good about keeping the smells out. So that's something. Personally, I just didn't like having a bucket because it would just get so like gnarly and messy on the inside, and having to clean it was just something I didn't want to do. So I started taking paper sacks. Like if I would say I'd go to a cafe and I'd, you know, get a croissant or something, and they'd serve it to me in like a little paper sack. Or, you know, I get a takeaway delivered to the house, and like all the takeaway boxes come in like a paper sack. I would save all of my paper sacks just in a little corner of my kitchen. And every once in a while I would double or even triple them up, put 3 all together as one, and then stick that on my kitchen counter and just chuck stuff in as I needed to. And then when it was full and it needed to be taken outside, I could just dump the whole thing into the compost pile, because that paper is an essential part of the compost pile. It can break down as well. So it was really just functionally very, very easy for me to do. The only reason I stopped doing that was because sometimes I'd let it go too long and, I'd get flies or things like that. Or sometimes kind of even with 3 bags together, the liquid would drip through and it would kind of like stain the countertop. And also, like, my kitchen's quite small. I don't have a lot of counter space. So, anything that's taking up counter space, I'm like, do you need to be here? So that was something that I tried for a while. And then I was actually inspired by seeing what a friend was doing, that she actually just kind of kept like a little bucket in her freezer. And so I cleared out my freezer and made some space. And I'm actually now, when I take my scraps and things, I put them into like a little plastic container. I usually use like old takeaway containers for this, and just stick everything in there, and then just take it and stick it in the freezer. And then when it all gets full, I will then just take it outside. So by sticking it in the freezer, I don't have to worry about flies. I don't have to worry about smells. I don't have to worry about anything else. And it is kind of the right kind of convenient for me to be able to kind of like deal with this. I want to talk you through really quickly how to do apartment composting, indoor composting. Basically, it's so simple. It's kind of crazy. You get some sort of large container. I took a like an old waste bin, drill some holes in it, poke some holes in it, something in the bottom for drainage. You put some sort of something, plastic or pottery or something beneath it to collect that drainage. And then you just layer your compost inside that bucket, just exactly as you would with anything outdoor. So do like a little layer of sticks and twigs at the bottom. Do a layer of soil and already made compost. It's really important to, when you're starting your compost pile, to add some sort of existing compost that already has kind of living microorganisms and things in it, because that will help get that thing started and get that breaking down process moving. So you've got your sticks and twigs, you've got your kind of soil and compost, and then just add your food stuff, add your your hair, your dryer lint, and then keep your bag of shredded paper aside. And anytime if you just added things, just add some more paper and things to the top to kind of create a sort of a buffer layer where the smells aren't really going to come out. It's going to help it to break it all down. And then one amazing thing that I've seen other people do is once you've kind of got all your layers in your bucket, you set your flower pots on top, and that will kind of weight down your overall compost. And then you don't even need to worry about watering your compost itself, because as you water your flowers, your herbs, or whatever you've set on top, that drainage will come down and will water the compost for you. And then when any kind of water or drainage comes down into that tray at the bottom, you can just take that and recycle it back into your compost pile, because that water, that drainage, has all kinds of like lovely nutrients and things that can go right back into the soil. So you don't even need to empty it or do anything with it. Just set it up and then just let it do its work, let it do its thing. And anytime if you've got kind of an indoor or an at-home compost thing and it's starting to get a little stinky, all you need to do is add a layer of trees. So most people talk about compost in terms of kind of like brown and green, and I think that's really useful. I think about it in terms of like trees and not trees. So trees is like your sticks, your twigs, dry leaves, paper, cardboard, you know, all of the kind of like the dry stuff that's gonna like break down a little bit more slowly. And then you're gonna have your nut trees, your, you know, potato peels and your onion skins and, you know, your apple cores and all your kind of like wet stuff, that all of that dry stuff needs to kind of like layer over. And you're gonna wanna do like 50-50 trees and not trees. So that's why it's so important to save so much of your kind of like paper and everything, is to like have trees available. And as well, if you kind of like, if you're just sort of like sweeping up around and you get like, you know, dirt and leaves and stuff, like, you know, from your front stoop or something like that, you can always add that. Like basically any kind of, any, you know, earthy organic material that's going to break down sooner or later somewhere, can go in your compost pile. The things to keep out that absolutely everyone agrees upon are like no animal waste, no meat, no dairy, no cat poo, no dog poo, just any kind of like animal leavings, other than hair, you want to leave out of your compost pile. Anything with like, you know, synthetic stuff, plastics. Take your stickers off of your fruit. I feel like that's a really obvious thing to say, and yet I see a lot of people kind of sticking their banana peels in with the stickers still sticking to them. It's like, no, take them off. The stickers won't break down and they'll get in the way of everything. So yeah. Anything that's just basically not organic material, don't put it in your compost. But anything that is, it's like, if it's just basically the earth returning to the earth, it can go in your compost pile, and it's better to keep it out of the landfill. As long as it's not like stuff that's chock full of pesticides, you should be good to go. So, what have I learned? I've learned that actually doing just sort of a basic outdoor compost pile is a little bit too high maintenance for me, and having an enclosed something is actually the less maintenance option. I've learned that actually kind of breaking down your, you know, whatever you're not going to be eating or using, things like chopping up your vegetables and breaking them down does help your compost pile to break down more easily. If you're doing any kind of like enclosed compost, you're going to want to make sure to keep the moisture levels the right amount. So, you know, I can't really tell you what the right amount is. You look at it and you go, oh, it looks pretty dry in here, add some water. You look at it and you go, ooh, that looks a little bit like swampy. Then you think, okay, you don't need any water. If you open up your compost and it is smelly or stinky, there's like tons of flies and things, then you probably have too much of your green and not enough of your brown. So just add a layer of brown, which can be sticks, twigs, leaves, hair, wood pellets. I've actually discovered that I can use my cat litter in my compost. So if I kind of, my cat litter is that kind of like untreated wood pellet stuff that like breaks down really easily, and it's just it's not got a lot of like chemicals or bleach or anything in it. And if I open up my compost and it's like any kind of stinky, all I have to do is just, you know, add a scoop of cat litter over it. Not used cat litter. You don't want the cat poo and the cat pee and stuff getting involved. You want fresh wood pellet cat litter, and not like the sand cat litter. Don't use that. That stuff is all kinds of chemicals. So yeah, but if you use the wood pellet cat litter, I find that because I could get like, you know, big, you know, 10-kilo bag of cat litter for pretty cheap. That's what we use, and then it's just an additional benefit to have in our compost pile. In conclusion, I am doing this video because I think that it's really important for everyone to do. It's a really actually easy way to reduce your overall carbon footprint if you're not taking all of your food scraps and sticking them in landfill, and instead you're sticking them back into the soil and helping to keep life going and create life with the food scraps that you don't want. I think it's, you know, it's a really, really good thing. It's a really worthwhile thing. And once you just do the initial basic setup, it doesn't have to cost very much. It doesn't, I mean, setting it up takes very little time. Maintaining it takes like no time. It takes no more time than taking out your trash anyways. So it's a really simple, worthwhile thing to do that actually, if more and more people did it and it became the norm, then I think it would be, you know, vastly beneficial to, you know, our overall environment and our overall kind of human impact on the environment. So that was why I wanted to make this video. It was why I wanted to kind of like, a lot of other people out there have like great advice about all the other things, you know, what to add, what not to add, how to maintain it, how to do it, da 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 da. My position is it's a really simple thing to do. It's an extremely low maintenance, high impact way to reduce your overall carbon footprint. So I hope that this motivates you and you're inspired to try it out. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this video. Please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.